Poor black waitress brings a homeless man to her ex's fancy wedding unaware he's an undercover CEO. The morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of Camille's studio apartment, casting long shadows across the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table. She was rushing to get ready for her shift at Murphy's Diner when she heard the mailman's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Most days, she avoided checking the mail. Nothing good ever came in those white envelopes anyway. But today, something made her pause at the door. Among the usual collection of overdue notices and grocery store flyers, there was something different. An envelope so thick and elegant it seemed to mock everything else in the pile. Her name was written in gold calligraphy across cream-colored cardstock, Miss Camille Washington. Her heart stopped. She recognized that handwriting. 3 years had passed, but some things you never forget, especially when they're attached to the worst heartbreak of your life. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation so expensive she could probably pay her rent with what it cost to print. The words seemed to dance mockingly before her eyes. Marcus Anthony Richardson III cordially invites you to witness his union with Victoria Elizabeth Hartwell. Saturday, the 15th of October. The grand ballroom at Rosewood Manor. Camille sank into her second-hand couch, the invitation fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. Marcus. The man who had whispered promises of forever while they shared dollar-menu dinners. The man who had held her close in his cramped college apartment, swearing that money didn't matter as long as they had each other. The man who had cheated on her with his business partner's daughter the moment his tech startup got its first major investment. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She picked up the invitation again, studying every detail. This wasn't an accident. Marcus Richardson III, he even had a Roman numeral now, had sent this deliberately. She could almost see his smug smile as he signed off on the guest list, imagining her opening this in her tiny apartment, working her dead-end job, living the small life he'd abandoned her for. The invitation felt like a slap across the face, but it also felt like a challenge. Camille stood up, smoothing down her uniform, a pink dress that had seen better days, with Murphy's Diner embroidered in fading letters across the chest. In the cracked mirror by her door, she studied her reflection. At 28, she was still beautiful, though the long hours and constant worry had carved subtle lines around her dark eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the calluses of someone who worked for every dollar. She wasn't the girl Marcus had left behind anymore. Life had hardened her, but it had also taught her something valuable. Dignity wasn't something you could buy, and it wasn't something anyone could take away from you unless you let them. By the time she arrived at Murphy's Diner, her mind was made up. She would go to that wedding. Not to grovel, not to cause a scene, but to show Marcus, and herself, that she had survived. That his betrayal hadn't broken her. The diner was its usual controlled chaos. The morning rush brought construction workers seeking coffee strong enough to wake the dead, office workers grabbing breakfast sandwiches, and the occasional businessman who'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in their working-class neighborhood. Camille moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, but her mind kept drifting to the invitation burning a hole in her purse. "You seem distracted today, honey," said Martha, the 60-something cook who'd worked at Murphy's since before Camille was born. Martha had become something of a mother figure to her, especially after Camille's own mother passed 2 years ago. "Just got some unexpected news," Camille replied, balancing 3 plates on her arm with the skill of someone who'd been waiting tables for over a decade. It was during the lunch lull that she noticed him again, the quiet man who came in every Tuesday and Friday, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and whatever soup was cheapest. He sat in the corner booth, hunched over a newspaper he'd clearly retrieved from the trash, his clothes clean but worn thin from too many washes. Most people ignored him, or worse, looked at him with barely concealed disgust. Homeless people weren't exactly welcome in most establishments, but Murphy's had a policy of serving anyone who could pay, and this man always paid, usually with exact change counted out in quarters and dimes. But there was something different about him that Camille had noticed over the months. While other customers scrolled through their phones or chatted loudly, he read. Not just any reading material, financial newspapers, business journals, sometimes even what looked like legal documents. His posture was straight despite his circumstances, and when he spoke to her, which was rare, his voice carried an education that didn't match his appearance. Today, as she refilled his coffee cup, an idea struck her with the force of lightning. "Excuse me," she said, glancing around to make sure no other customers needed her attention. "I know this might sound strange, but what's your name?" He looked up from his paper. Today it was the Wall Street Journal, she noticed, and studied her with surprisingly sharp eyes. "Elijah," he said simply. "Elijah, I have a weird question for you." She sat down across from him, something she'd never done before. "How would you feel about going to a fancy wedding this Saturday?" He raised an eyebrow, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his expression, surprise, maybe even amusement. "I know how it sounds," she continued quickly. "But I need a date to this thing, and I can't afford to hire an escort or ask any of my friends to take time off work. You seem like a gentleman, and honestly, I just don't want to walk in there alone." Elijah set down his newspaper carefully, folding it with precise movements. "What kind of wedding?" "The expensive kind. The kind where people judge you for breathing wrong." She hesitated, then decided honesty was her best policy. "It's my ex-boyfriend's wedding. He sent me an invitation, probably as some kind of sick joke. I want to go, not to cause trouble, but to prove something to myself. That I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I come from." For a long moment, Elijah said nothing. He studied her face as if reading a complex equation, and Camille found herself holding her breath. "What time should I pick you up?" he asked finally. Camille blinked. "Really? Just like that? Just like that?" He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. For just a moment, the worn clothes and weathered appearance seemed to fall away, and she glimpsed something else underneath, something that made her wonder who Elijah really was. They exchanged information, and Camille found herself walking home with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She had a date to Marcus's wedding, and more importantly, she had a plan. That evening, she stood in her closet, staring at the meager collection of clothes hanging there. She had exactly $47 in her checking account after paying rent, which meant designer gowns were definitely out of the question. But Camille had learned to be resourceful. The next morning, she took the bus to the Goodwill on 5th Street, armed with determination and her last $20. After 2 hours of searching through racks of donated clothes, she found it. A black evening gown that had probably cost more than she made in a month when it was new. It was slightly too big, but nothing a few safety pins and alterations couldn't fix. As she held the dress up to herself in the changing room mirror, Camille smiled for the first time since receiving that invitation. Marcus wanted to show her how far he'd come. Fine. She'd show him that she'd come pretty far herself, just in a different direction. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. The Rosewood Manor rose from manicured grounds like a palace from a fairy tale. The kind of fairy tale where the princess had a trust fund and the prince owned 3 tech companies. Camille stood at the entrance, smoothing down her thrifted black gown for the 100th time, feeling like she was about to infiltrate enemy territory. Beside her, Elijah adjusted his tie with the careful precision of a man who understood the importance of details. She had to admit, he cleaned up remarkably well. The suit he wore was older, perhaps from the 70s, but it was clearly well made, the kind of tailoring that didn't come cheap, even second-hand. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his posture was straighter than she'd ever seen it. Still, there was something in his eyes as he surveyed the mansion, a look she couldn't quite place. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Camille took a deep breath, tasting the October air mixed with the scent of imported roses and old money. "As ready as I'll ever be." The moment they stepped through the ornate doorway, she felt the weight of 100 stairs. The grand ballroom was everything the invitation had promised and more. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses, walls draped in ivory silk, and tables set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it wrong. The guests were exactly what she'd expected, women dripping in diamonds and designer gowns that cost more than Camille made in 6 months, men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussing merger deals between sips of champagne that probably cost $50 a glass. This was Marcus's world now, a world where your worth was measured by your net worth, and everyone who mattered had a number after their name on the Forbes list. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. The voice hit her like ice water. Camille turned to see Victoria Elizabeth Hartwell, now Richardson, approaching in a wedding dress that probably required its own zip code. The future Mrs. Marcus Richardson III was everything Camille was not: blonde, polished, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to check your bank balance before buying groceries. "Victoria," Camille said evenly, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Congratulations on your special day." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "How quaint that you came. And with a..." Her eyes swept over Elijah with barely concealed disdain. "Friend? This is Elijah," Camille said, her chin lifting slightly. "Elijah, meet Victoria, the bride." Elijah stepped forward with a grace that surprised Camille, taking Victoria's perfectly manicured hand and kissing it with old-world courtesy. "Congratulations on your wedding, Mrs. Richardson. You look radiant." For just a moment, Victoria seemed taken aback by his manners, but she quickly recovered. "How charming! Well, do enjoy the champagne. I believe it's from Marcus's private collection." As Victoria glided away in a rustle of silk and smugness, Camille felt her face burn with embarrassment. She should have known better than to come here, should have thrown that invitation in the trash where it belonged. "Breathe," Elijah said quietly beside her. His hand touched her elbow gently, steadying her. "You belong here as much as anyone else." But as they moved deeper into the reception, Camille could feel the stairs following them like spotlights. Conversations paused as they passed, then resumed in hushed whispers. She caught fragments of words. "Waitress, desperate, pathetic." Each whisper felt like a small knife between her ribs. They found their assigned table, table 15, as far from the head table as possible without being in the parking lot. Their tablemates were clearly the B-list guests, Marcus's college acquaintances who hadn't quite made it big, distant relatives, and other people who fell into the "had to invite them but didn't want to" category. "So," said a woman in a dress that screamed, "expensive but trying too hard," leaning across the table with the predatory smile of someone who'd found fresh gossip material. "How do you know the groom?" "We used to date," Camille said simply, refusing to elaborate. The woman's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, how interesting. And this is your..." "Elijah." He introduced himself before Camille could answer. His voice was calm, measured, and somehow commanded attention despite its quiet tone. Throughout dinner, Camille found herself watching Elijah more closely. While everyone else at their table chattered loudly, trying to impress each other with name drops and expense accounts, he listened. Really listened. And when he did speak, it was with a precision that made people lean in closer, though she noticed they seemed unsettled by something they couldn't quite place. She also noticed something else: his eyes. While he maintained polite conversation with their tablemates, his gaze kept drifting to the head table, studying the men in expensive suits who surrounded Marcus. There was something calculating in that look, like he was solving a complex puzzle in his head. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, his voice booming over the increasingly drunk crowd. "The groom would like to say a few words." Marcus stood, champagne glass in hand, looking every inch the successful entrepreneur in his custom tuxedo. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced, and when he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of someone who never doubted his place in the world. "Thank you all for being here on this incredible day," he began, and the room erupted in polite applause. "When I look around this room, I see the people who matter most to me, my family, my friends, my business partners who've helped me build something extraordinary." His eyes found Camille across the room, and his smile turned sharp. "You know, success is about making choices. About knowing when to hold on and when to let go. About recognizing opportunities and having the courage to take them, even if it means leaving comfortable mediocrity behind." The words hit their target perfectly. Camille felt her cheeks burn as she realized every person in the room knew exactly who that comment was aimed at. Around her, she could hear the barely suppressed snickers, see the sideways glances and knowing smirks. "Some people are content to stay where they are," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "And that's okay. The world needs people who are satisfied with simpler lives. But others dream bigger. They reach higher. They choose to surround themselves with excellence." He raised his glass toward Victoria, who beamed at him like he just recited Shakespeare. "Here's to choosing wisely, to marrying up, and to never settling for less than you deserve." The applause was thunderous. People clinked glasses and laughed, and Camille felt like she was drowning in a sea of champagne and cruelty. She gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles went white, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. That's when she felt it, a warm hand covering hers under the table. Elijah's fingers were steady, strong, and somehow they anchored her to her chair when everything in her wanted to flee. "Easy," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Let him have his moment. Some victories are shorter than others." There was something in his voice, a certainty that made her look at him more closely. In the ballroom's golden light, studying his profile as he watched Marcus with those sharp, calculating eyes, Camille realized she didn't know anything about the man she'd brought as her date. Nothing at all. As the evening progressed, Camille found herself fascinated by a transformation she couldn't quite explain. While she wallowed in humiliation from Marcus's public mockery, Elijah seemed to grow more confident with each passing hour. It was subtle at first, the way he straightened his shoulders, how his voice carried a little further when he spoke, the manner in which his eyes swept the room with increasing authority. "Excuse me for a moment," he said quietly, standing from their table with fluid grace. "I believe I recognize some old acquaintances." Camille watched in bewilderment as Elijah approached a cluster of men near the bar, clearly Marcus's business associates based on their expensive suits and the way they gestured with their cigars like they were conducting invisible orchestras. These were the kind of men who made decisions that affected thousands of people before their morning coffee, the kind who measured success in stock options and quarterly reports. She expected them to dismiss Elijah immediately, maybe even call security. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The conversation stopped. One of the men, a silver-haired gentleman who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine, went pale as snow. His cigar slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a small shower of sparks. "My God!" she heard him whisper, even from her distant table. "Elijah? Elijah Morgan?" The name seemed to ripple through the group like an electric shock. Phones appeared as if by magic, fingers frantically swiping and typing. Camille watched in amazement as these titans of industry, men who probably hadn't shown genuine surprise since the dot-com boom, stared at her homeless date like he was a ghost materializing at their cocktail party. "Gentlemen," Elijah said, and even across the crowded ballroom, his voice carried with quiet authority. "It's been a while. We thought you were." One of them started, then stopped, glancing around nervously. "Dead? Broke? Completely out of the game?" Elijah's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. "Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. Though I'll admit, I've been keeping a low profile." From her table, Camille strained to hear more, but the conversation had dropped to urgent whispers. What she could see was the body language, these powerful men leaning in like students desperate to catch every word from a master professor. Whatever Elijah was saying, they hung on it like gospel. A young executive with slicked back hair and nervous energy fumbled with his phone, showing the screen to his companions. Camille caught fragments of excited whispers. "Founding partner, biggest exit in tech history, ghost investor." The pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed began shifting in her mind. Marcus, holding court at the head table, seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding near the bar. He was too busy basking in compliments from his new in-laws, too intoxicated by his own success story to notice that the dynamics of his wedding reception were quietly shifting. but Victoria noticed. Camille saw the bride's eyes narrow as she tracked the unusual gathering, watched her lean over to whisper something urgent in Marcus's ear. Whatever she said made him look up sharply, his gaze finding the cluster of men surrounding Elijah. Even from across the room, Camille could see Marcus's confusion transform into something else, a flicker of recognition, followed by what looked like dawning horror. "Mrs. Washington?" Camille turned to find a woman in an elegant navy dress standing beside her table. She was perhaps 45, with intelligent eyes and the kind of confidence that came from running boardrooms. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" Camille asked. "Sarah Chin, Venture Capital. I couldn't help but notice your companion." The woman's voice was careful, measured. "That's Elijah Morgan, isn't it?" Yes, that's Elijah," Camille said, feeling like she was missing half the conversation. Sarah Chin sat down uninvited, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Do you have any idea who you brought to this wedding?" "He's a friend," Camille said defensively. "A good man who's going through a difficult time." Sarah's laugh was soft but incredulous. "Difficult time? Honey, that man could buy this entire venue with his pocket change. Elijah Morgan isn't homeless, he's invisible by choice. He's been the ghost in the machine of Silicon Valley for the last 5 years." Camille felt the world tilt sideways. "What are you talking about?" 5 years ago, Elijah Morgan was the co-founder and primary investor behind Zenith Industries. When they went public, his stake was worth roughly $2.7 billion. Then, overnight, he vanished. Sold everything, disappeared from public life, became this urban legend that venture capitalists whisper about at conferences. The words hit Camille like physical blows. Billion. With a B. The quiet man who counted out quarters for coffee, who read discarded newspapers, who agreed to be her date to avoid awkwardness, was worth more money than she could comprehend. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would someone with that much money live like he has nothing?" Sarah shrugged. "The rumors vary. Some say he was investigating corporate corruption from the inside. Others think he was researching social inequality. The smart money says he was vetting potential investments by experiencing different levels of society firsthand." Across the room, the conversation at the bar was growing more animated. More men had joined the circle, and Camille could see phones being passed around, documents being pulled up on screens. Whatever was happening, it was building to something significant. "There's something else you should know," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Marcus's company, Junotech? The startup that made him rich enough to afford this circus? Elijah Morgan is listed as the primary silent investor. Has been since the beginning." Camille's breath caught in her throat. "That's impossible. Public records don't lie, honey. Your friend didn't just bring you to this wedding as a date, he brought you as the man who owns your ex-boyfriend's entire future." As if summoned by their conversation, Elijah appeared at their table. His expression was calm, but Camille could see something new in his eyes, a sharpness that had been hidden beneath layers of careful disguise. "Ladies," he said politely, "I hope you don't mind if I steal Camille for a moment. There's something I need to discuss with her." Sarah Chin stood immediately, extending her hand. "Mr. Morgan, it's an honor. Sarah Chin, Meridian Ventures. We've been trying to get a meeting with you for 3 years." Elijah shook her hand with practiced courtesy. "Ms. Chin, perhaps we'll have that conversation sooner than you think." As Sarah walked away, clearly buzzing with excitement, Elijah turned to Camille. For the first time since she'd known him, she felt like she was seeing the real man, and he was nothing like the homeless stranger she'd invited to be her shield against humiliation. "I suppose you have questions," he said quietly. Camille stared at him, this man who had sat in her diner for months, who had let her think she was doing him a favor by inviting him to a wedding where he apparently owned half the guest list. "Just one," she managed. "Who are you really?" Elijah smiled, and it was like watching the sun emerge from behind storm clouds. "Tonight, Camille, I'm exactly who I've always been. The only difference is that everyone else is finally paying attention." The revelation should have changed everything, but as Camille sat beside Elijah, watching the wedding reception continue around them, she realized it changed nothing at all. This was still the man who had tipped her with quarters, who had read discarded newspapers with the focus of a scholar, who had agreed to accompany her to face her demons without asking for anything in return. The money didn't matter. The power didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here, and somehow, his presence made her feel like she could face whatever came next. But Marcus wasn't finished with his cruelty. As the evening progressed, he seemed to grow bolder with each glass of champagne, his comments becoming more pointed, more personal. During the dinner service, he made a show of pointing out how some people really know their way around serving tables, drawing snickers from his new in-laws. When the dancing began, he loudly wondered if service industry workers even knew how to waltz. Each barb hit its mark, and Camille felt herself shrinking smaller with every cruel observation. She could see the other guests watching her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, as if her presence was somehow contaminating their elegant evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced as the dessert course was being cleared. "The groom has asked for the microphone to share some final thoughts with you all." Marcus stood with the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His tuxedo was perfect, his smile practiced, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the ballroom with crystal clarity. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this incredible milestone with Victoria and me," he began, raising his champagne flute high. "Tonight is about new beginnings, about choosing to surround yourself with excellence, about having the wisdom to recognize quality when you see it." His gaze found Camille across the room, and his smile turned predatory. "You know, they say you can judge a person's character by how they treat people in the service industry. But I think there's an even better measure. You can judge someone's potential by whether they're content to stay in service, or whether they have the ambition to rise above it." The words hit like physical blows. Camille felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of their judgment, their pity, their barely concealed amusement at her humiliation. "Some people dream big," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. "They reach for something better, something worthy of their potential. Others," he shrugged eloquently, "others find their level and stay there. And honestly, that's probably for the best. The world needs people who are content with simpler lives, who find fulfillment in basic work." The laughter that rippled through the crowd was like broken glass in Camille's ears. She gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles went white, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, to escape, to preserve what little dignity she had left. But then she felt it, a warm, steady hand covering hers under the table. "Breathe," Elijah whispered, his voice so quiet only she could hear. "Let him finish. Some people need to dig their own graves. Everyone has to start somewhere." Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Even if some people never move past that starting point. But that's what makes success so sweet, knowing that you had the vision, the drive, the sheer determination to become something more than what you were born to be." He raised his glass toward Victoria, who beamed at him as if he just delivered the Gettysburg Address. "Here's to marrying up, to choosing excellence, to never settling for less than you deserve. And here's to leaving the past, and the people in it, exactly where they belong." The applause was thunderous. Glasses clinked, people cheered, and Camille felt like she was drowning in a sea of champagne and cruelty. That's when Elijah stood. "Indeed," he said, his voice cutting through the applause like a blade through silk. "Some people never leave the table, they just change what they're serving." The laughter died as if someone had flipped a switch. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the back corner where Elijah stood, his posture straight, his presence suddenly commanding in a way that made the air itself seem to shift. He moved toward the front of the room with fluid grace, each step measured and purposeful. Marcus, still holding the microphone, watched with growing confusion as this apparent homeless man approached the stage with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice uncertain for the first time all evening. "I'm not sure." "Thank you," Elijah said, taking the microphone with polite but inexorable authority. His voice, when it filled the ballroom, carried a power that made even the wait staff stop and listen. "My name is Elijah Morgan," he began, and the ripple of recognition that moved through the crowd was like electricity. "And I'd like to share a few thoughts about success, character, and the importance of recognizing true value." Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Phones appeared throughout the room as guests scrambled to record what they sensed was about to become a historic moment. "Success," Elijah continued, his voice growing stronger, "is often measured by the wrong metrics. We look at bank accounts, stock portfolios, the thread count of our sheets. But real success, lasting success, is measured by integrity, by how we treat people when we think no one important is watching, by whether we build others up or tear them down to make ourselves feel taller." Victoria had gone pale, her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looking garish under the ballroom lights. Around the room, Marcus's business associates were pulling out their phones, frantically typing and whispering to each other. "I've spent considerable time observing human nature," Elijah continued. "I've watched people from every level of society, and I've learned that true character has nothing to do with circumstances. I've seen dishwashers display more dignity than CEOs, waitresses show more grace under pressure than diplomats." His gaze found Camille across the room, and for a moment, his expression softened. "Tonight, I witnessed a remarkable young woman endure public humiliation with a composure that would make world leaders envious. And I watched a successful businessman demonstrate exactly the kind of character that makes smart investors reconsider their partnerships." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, sensing that something monumental was happening. Elijah's smile was sharp as winter starlight. "You see, Marcus, I've been having second thoughts about Juno Tech Industries. As the company's primary investor, I've been concerned about reports of financial irregularities, workplace toxicity, and leadership that values cruelty over competence." Marcus swayed on his feet like a man who'd been punched. That's impossible. I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the man who owns 67% of your company," Elijah said with deadly calm. "I'm the silent partner who's been funding your lifestyle, your wedding, and apparently, your inflated sense of self-worth." The ballroom erupted. Guests surged forward, phones recording, voices raised in shock and excitement. Marcus grabbed the edge of the head table to keep from falling, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. "Therefore," Elijah continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I am formally withdrawing all financial support from Juno Tech Industries, effective immediately. All contracts, funding commitments, and future investments are hereby terminated." Victoria's scream pierced the air like a fire alarm. Marcus collapsed into his chair, his face the color of old parchment. Around the room, his business associates were already making frantic phone calls, trying to distance themselves from the disaster unfolding before their eyes. "Oh," Elijah added, almost as an afterthought. "And Marcus? That comment about people knowing their place? You might want to reconsider that philosophy. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you never see coming." He set the microphone down with gentle precision and walked calmly back toward Camille, leaving behind him a ballroom in complete chaos. Lawyers materialized from thin air, surrounding Marcus with urgent whispers. Investors who had been celebrating with him moments before now looked at him like he carried a plague. The carefully orchestrated celebration of his success was crumbling in real time, and everyone who mattered in his world was watching it happen. Through it all, Elijah remained serene, offering his arm to Camille as if they were simply leaving a quiet dinner rather than the scene of a corporate execution. "Shall we go?" he asked. The October night air felt like freedom after the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. Camille walked beside Elijah in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the seismic shift that had just occurred. Behind them, the chaos continued, car doors slamming as guests fled the scene, urgent phone conversations as damage control began, and somewhere in the distance, Victoria's voice raised in what sounded like a complete nervous breakdown. They reached the parking lot before Camille finally found her voice. I don't understand any of this, she said, stopping beside a modest sedan that looked nothing like what she imagined a billionaire would drive. You're really him? Elijah Morgan? The tech mogul who disappeared? I never disappeared, Elijah said gently, fishing keys from his pocket. I just changed my perspective. Sometimes you have to step outside the game to understand how it's really played. But why? The question burst out of her with desperate confusion. Why live like that? Why eat at Murphy's Diner and count out quarters for coffee when you could afford to buy the whole building? Elijah leaned against his car, studying her face in the soft glow of the parking lot lights. 5 years ago, I realized I was surrounded by people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at me. Business partners, friends, even romantic interests. Everyone wanted something. I started to wonder if anyone would care about Elijah the person rather than Elijah the portfolio. He gestured back toward the manor, where emergency vehicles were now arriving. I also started to notice how wealth isolated me from reality. I was making decisions that affected thousands of people's lives, but I had no idea what those lives actually looked like. So I decided to find out. Camille shook her head, overwhelmed. You've been conducting some kind of experiment? For 5 years? Not an experiment. An education. His voice grew softer. Do you remember the first time you served me at Murphy's? Vaguely. It was months ago. March 15th. You just finished a double shift, and there was a businessman at table 6 who was treating you terribly. Snapping his fingers, calling you girl, complaining about everything from the temperature of his coffee to the speed of service. The memory came flooding back, along with the humiliation she'd felt that day. After he left without tipping, Elijah continued, you took his dishes to the kitchen. I watched you take 3 deep breaths, compose yourself, and then come to my table with a genuine smile. You asked how my day was going, and you actually listened to the answer. Camille felt tears prick at her eyes. I was just doing my job. No, Elijah said firmly. You were being kind to a stranger when you had every reason to be bitter. You maintained your grace when grace was the hardest thing to hold on to. That's not something you can teach, Camille. That's character. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the evening settling around them like a blanket. What happens now? Camille asked finally. To Marcus, I mean. And Junotech. The company will likely collapse within the week, Elijah said matter-of-factly. Without my funding, other investors will pull out. The investigation that follows will probably reveal the financial irregularities I've been tracking. Marcus will lose everything. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with consequences. Elijah's expression was thoughtful rather than vindictive. Marcus made his choices. He chose cruelty over kindness, ego over integrity. Tonight just accelerated the natural result of those choices. Camille thought about the man she'd once loved, now facing the destruction of everything he'd built. She should have felt vindicated, but instead, she felt something more complex, sadness for the person he might have been if he'd made different choices. There's something I need to ask you, Elijah said, his tone shifting to something more formal. And I want you to know that your answer won't change anything about tonight. You don't owe me anything. What is it? I'm launching a new initiative. Something I've been planning for years, but never found the right person to help me execute. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple business card. It's a foundation focused on ethical business practices, supporting people who've been overlooked by traditional power structures, creating opportunities for those who have talent and integrity but not connections. Camille took the card, her hands trembling slightly. What are you saying? I'm offering you a partnership. Not employment, partnership. Equal say in every decision, equal stake in every success, and the resources to make the kind of changes you've probably dreamed about but never thought possible. The words hit her like a physical force. Elijah, I'm a waitress. I'd barely finished community college. I don't know anything about running a foundation. And I'm a billionaire who spent 5 years pretending to be homeless. He replied with a gentle smile. Sometimes the most unconventional backgrounds prepare us for the most important work. But why me? Because tonight, when Marcus tried to destroy you in front of hundreds of people, you didn't break. You didn't retaliate, didn't cause a scene, didn't let his cruelty make you cruel. His voice grew stronger, more certain. You maintained your dignity when dignity was the hardest thing to hold on to. That's leadership, Camille. That's the foundation of everything worth building. Camille stared at the business card, her mind spinning. This is insane. Yesterday I was worried about making rent, and now you're offering me a chance to change lives. Elijah finished. Starting with your own. She looked back at the manor, where the last of the guests were fleeing and police cars were arriving to deal with what appeared to be a complete meltdown. Then she looked at the man beside her, this enigmatic figure who had appended everything she thought she knew about power, wealth, and justice. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Elijah said, opening the passenger door for her. Take all the time you need. But remember this, you walked into that ballroom tonight thinking you were powerless, and you're leaving having watched a billionaire choose justice over profit. That should tell you something about your own worth. As they drove away from Rosewood Manor, Camille realized that regardless of what happened next, she would never be the same person who had received that cruel invitation a week ago. Tonight had changed everything, not because of money or revenge, but because she had learned something invaluable about her own strength. Some transformations, she thought, begin long before you realize they're happening. 6 months later, Camille Washington stood at the head of a gleaming conference table, addressing a room full of investors, entrepreneurs, and policymakers who hung on her every word. The view from the 42nd floor of the downtown financial district was breathtaking, the city spread out below like a living testament to ambition and possibility. The Washington Initiative has exceeded every projection, she said, gesturing to the presentation screen behind her. In 6 months, we've funded 87 businesses, created over 1,200 jobs, and maintained a success rate of 93%, nearly double the industry standard. Gone was the pink uniform with fading letters. In its place, Camille wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of success without ostentation. Her hair was styled professionally, her posture confident, but the most striking change wasn't in her appearance, it was in her presence. She commanded the room with the quiet authority of someone who had earned their place at the table. More importantly, she continued, we've proven that traditional metrics for evaluating potential are fundamentally flawed. When you look beyond credit scores and pedigree to assess character and determination, you find extraordinary talent in the most unexpected places. The applause was genuine, respectful. These weren't people humoring the new girl. They were seasoned professionals recognizing exceptional results. At the back of the room, Elijah watched with unconcealed pride. He hadn't changed much from their diner days, still preferring understated clothes and a low profile, but now everyone in the room knew exactly who he was. The mystery was gone, replaced by a reputation for backing revolutionary ideas with unshakable principles. After the meeting, as the room emptied with the satisfied murmur of successful business, Camille found herself alone with her thoughts. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes, from counting quarters to approving 7-figure investments, from being humiliated at a wedding to being profiled in Fortune as the waitress rewriting venture capital. Any regrets? Elijah asked, joining her at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Just one, Camille said, then smiled. I should have taken this leap sooner. Her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it and couldn't suppress a laugh. What is it? Elijah asked. A LinkedIn message from Victoria Richardson. Camille shook her head in amazement. She wants to reconnect and discuss potential business opportunities. Apparently, she's starting a lifestyle brand and thinks I might be interested in investing. And will you be? Absolutely not, Camille said without hesitation. But I'll send her contact information for 3 other investors who might be. I don't hold grudges, but I also don't forget character assessments. Elijah nodded approvingly. Speaking of character assessments, did you see the latest news about Marcus? Camille had seen it. The collapse of Juno Tech had been swift and brutal. The investigation that followed Elijah's withdrawal had uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities, employee exploitation, and toxic management practices that had sent Marcus's reputation into free fall. He'd lost everything: his company, his fortune, his marriage to Victoria, who had filed for divorce the moment his assets were frozen. "He's working at a tech support call center now," Camille said. "Minimum wage, customer service, dealing with people's problems all day instead of creating them. How does that make you feel?" Camille considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she might have felt vindicated, even gleeful. Now, her emotions were more complex. "Sad," she said finally. "Not for him exactly, but for the waste of it all. He had intelligence, resources, opportunities that most people can only dream of. He could have built something meaningful, helped people, left a positive legacy. Instead, he chose cruelty and arrogance. That's wisdom," Elijah said quietly. "The ability to see lessons rather than just victories. Is that what this has all been?" Camille asked, turning to face him. "A lesson?" "For both of us," Elijah replied. "You've taught me that there are still people who can be trusted with power, who won't let success corrupt their fundamental decency. And hopefully, I've taught you that your worth was never determined by other people's opinions of your circumstances." Camille looked around the conference room, her conference room now, at the evidence of everything they'd built together. The Washington Initiative was changing lives daily, funding dreams that traditional banks had dismissed, creating opportunities for people who look like her, who came from where she came from. "There's something I want to discuss with you," she said. "I've been thinking about expansion." "Oh? I want to buy Murphy's Diner." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" "Martha's retiring next month. The owners want to sell, but they're worried about maintaining the character of the place. I want to turn it into more than just a restaurant, a community hub, a place where we can identify and mentor people with potential, regardless of their current circumstances." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to hire people like I used to be. People who've been counted out, overlooked, underestimated." Elijah's smile was brilliant. "I think that's the best expansion proposal I've heard all year." "There's more," Camille continued, her excitement building. "I want to create a network. Diners, coffee shops, small businesses in working-class neighborhoods, places where we can spot talent early and provide support before people get trapped in cycles of limited opportunity. A talent pipeline disguised as comfort food," Elijah mused. "I love it." As they gathered their things to leave, Camille caught her reflection in the conference room's glass walls. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, powerful in all the ways that truly mattered. But underneath the tailored clothes and professional polish, she was still the same person who had served coffee with genuine kindness, who had maintained grace under pressure, who had refused to let cruelty make her cruel. "You know what I realized?" she said as they waited for the elevator. "What's that?" "The invitation to Marcus's wedding wasn't meant to humiliate me. It was meant to change my life, just not in the way he intended." Elijah chuckled. "Funny how the universe works sometimes. He thought he was showing me how small my life was compared to his success. Instead, he introduced me to someone who helped me discover how big my life could become." As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Camille thought about the journey from that devastating wedding invitation to this moment. She thought about the homeless man who had been a billionaire, the ex-boyfriend who had been destroyed by his own arrogance, and the waitress who had become someone she never imagined she could be. But mostly, she thought about the truth she'd learned, that real power wasn't about what you could take from others, but what you could give. And sometimes, the most transformative moments came not from getting what you wanted, but from discovering what you were truly capable of. Tomorrow, she would approve funding for a young woman who wanted to start a nonprofit for foster children. Next week, she would give the keynote speech at a conference on ethical investing. Next month, she would be featured in a documentary about social entrepreneurship. Camille Washington, the waitress who had changed the game, was just getting started. And the best part? She was doing it all while remaining exactly who she had always been, Someone who believed that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. The game hadn't changed her. She had changed the game.